There is a joke about how what happened to Disco Elysium might have been the most Disco Elysium thing that could have happened to it. And now, with its back against the wall and the Elysium IP in perpetual limbo, Studio Zaum decided to create an entirely new game, Zero Parades. It's an espionage RPG that I think is just as self-aware of its production context as Disco Elysium was. After all, Zaum's own pitch for the new spy thriller reads: 5 years ago, you led your team into the abyss and have been haunted by your failures ever since. Now you've been recalled for a mysterious assignment that may give you a chance to prove yourself again. Herschel, the game's disgraced protagonist, has tanked her reputation in a major screw-up and is now grasping at one final chance to reassert herself and win back the trust of the people she let down. Zaum's reputation has of course also taken a nosedive. And just like Herschel, they too are forced to put everything into one last stand, into a project that will either make or break them. So what is Zero Parades? It's a narrative RPG where you take on the role of Herschel, a spy who has been sent on a mission to the independent city-state of Portofino. Portofino serves as both the stage of the game and as a microcosm of its world's politics. It's the pressure point of 3 overwhelming forces that seek to impose their will on it. The techno-fascist empire La Luz is projecting cultural dominance to soft-launch an invasion. They're trying to win the hearts of the Portofiran youth with the power of anime and Funko Pops, while weaponizing their equivalent of K-pop into a metaphysical superweapon. The second global player is the transnational bank Emter that is in the process of forcing Portofino into eternal financial servitude through unrepayable loans. Think of our world's IMF. And then there's the communist superbloc that sends you to keep Portofino from falling into the hands of your enemies. While your exact assignment belongs in spoiler territory, it involves regular clashes with intelligence agents of the other parties, as well as your own former colleagues. The game requires you to make informed judgments on who to trust, who to manipulate, and who to strong-arm to reach your goals. On a technical level, Zero Parades is a disco-like if there ever was one. It's an isometric narrative RPG where you roll checks, internalize thoughts, and have your skills serve you as mental companions. The essence of every so-called disco-like is, of course, its writing. It's here that Zero Parades must prove that it has the escape velocity to break free from the gravity of its famous predecessor, lest it keep orbiting the world of Elysium, forced to repeat its jokes, tropes, and expressions that, in the hands of a copycat, would soon degrade to mere clichés. But before we pass judgment on the very soul of Zero Parades, I want to quickly gloss over its game mechanics and art, both of which I think are handled well and are worth touching on. Because while I will voice my fair share of critique of the game, I must say that on a technical level they improved on every single gameplay mechanic of Disco Elysium. Not by reinventing the wheel, but by making small improvements that make the game ever so slightly more engaging, something that a read-em-up is of course always in need of. For example, instead of HP and morale ticking down to 0 and causing a physical or mental breakdown, you now have to keep your fatigue, anxiety and delirium from reaching 20. It makes you carefully navigate around situations that may either exhaust you, unsettle you, or make you question your sense of reality, depending on which stat you're short of maxing out. Like in Disco Elysium, you can use consumables to manage your meters, but this time there are no easy fixes anymore, only trade-offs. Alcohol decreases your anxiety but heightens your delirium, coffee lowers your fatigue but spikes your anxiety, and so on. With no more magic pills to brute force you through the game, you can now only reconfigure the mess you wrought upon your body and psyche. I personally enjoyed this little micromanagement. It reminded me of how we balance our little helpful substances in real life, and it's only natural that Herschel is constantly in varying states of being messed up. If, against all precautions, a stat reaches 20, it will cause permanent damage to one skill in its respective faculty. This only happened to me once, and since I didn't want to save scum, it forced me to learn the game and play more cautiously. Soon after, I became quite good at anticipating which scenarios might spike my cortisol and administered the correct drugs beforehand. Your fatigue, anxiety and delirium are also affected by the new pressure mechanic they added to dice rolls. It lets you add another dice to the checks that you really need to win, but the strain adds 5 points to the skill's corresponding stat. Again, I like this mechanic. It adds a bit more player agency and risk analysis to simple dice rolls. Disco's thought cabinet also underwent a revamp. You still come across thoughts to internalize, but instead of mostly granting you stat bonuses, the new conditioning system affects the events and rules of the game itself. There is, for example, one thought that deactivates manual saves and makes it impossible to save scum. Others let you steal from vending machines, extend your dialogue options, enable an easy mode, or just put the peoples before every item in your inventory to pay a deliberately performative lip service to your political alignment.
It achieves nothing, but looking at all of your things might make you feel really revolutionary.
And when you violate the rules of your chosen conditioning, you suffer a temporary penalty. It forces you to roleplay within the identity that you created for your playthroughs, Herschel. Lastly, Zero Parades features the dramatic encounter mechanic. Throughout the game, Herschel will find herself in inescapable high-stakes situations that require her to make a split-second decision in the face of a sudden threat, for example when encountering an enemy agent. During these clashes, time slows down and you are presented with a limited set of options, typically to either flee or engage your opponent. This has been marketed as a new mechanic, but if you ever played Disco Elysium, you will notice that it's really just the tribunal and shorter. However, the fact that it now happens more frequently adds a certain suspense to the game, because you never know when your leisurely side quests will be disrupted by a violent return of the main plot. In the art department, Zero Parades plays to its strengths. Without Disco's art director Alexander Rostov, the old impressionist character portraits give way to a more straightforward style that yet captures the character traits of whoever you are talking to. The biggest difference might be that personality is now conveyed more through body language and facial expressions than symbolism and abstract color choices. The game's map keeps its painterly style that we saw in Disco Elysium thanks to Kaspar Tamsalu, who worked on Disco's map and who is now the art director of Zero Parades. Portofino comes alive as a busy and lived-in place that now also gives you a more pronounced vertical dimension to explore. Both the exterior but especially the interior levels are obsessively detailed and painted with environmental storytelling in mind. My only gripe with the map is its very consistent color palette that can make it hard to orient yourself. The map's art has the habit of throwing in little sparks of color, mostly green and purple, but if you blur your vision just a little, everything just ends up being the same shade of brown, without distinct color languages for different parts of the town. That's why I enjoyed my trips outside the urban center, where, for example, a missile silo offered a much-needed change of scenery. But besides all the nitpicking, Zero Parades has one of the best-looking isometric maps I've ever played on. My personal highlight of the game's art, however, is the work of Anton Will, who previously painted Disco's Thought Cabinet. He provides the artworks for the journal and conditioning menu, where every assignment and thought is captured in a surreal and sometimes grotesque, yet hypnotic scene. Just like Disco Elysium, Zero Parades comes with full voice acting, and you might even recognize some returning talent.
What happened, Sugar Tits? You get lost, or are you just looking for company?
Kill this lecherous geriatric.
No, I hid it in the room where they kept me. I was so hurt.
The roundabout does exude a certain melancholic atmosphere. Discourages lingering.
A terrible thing to live within the ruins of the self. But we keep going any way we can.
Some very spooky stuff appears to be going down in Portofino.
Even the middle-aged female demographic has succumbed. I must redouble my efforts.
He heard music designed to fine-tune the estrogen production centers of prepubescent girls, and it destroyed him.
Farewell, combatant.
The only complaint I heard was about the performance of the main narrator who voices your skills. She has a distinctive nasal delivery that is prone to swallowing consonants.
Capital beats down another one. What a joy it is to be unregulated.
It's an eccentric voice that I think would have been well suited for a single character, but since she is the voice of the game, I wouldn't blame you for getting wary of her vocal fry over the span of 30 hours.
When you were 16, you once put your blood type down as mysterious in an attempt to impress a vaguely attractive doctor.
In my case, however, she ended up growing on me. It might be an acquired taste, but I think it fits Herschel to have a raspy and disgruntled inner voice that at times veers into the theatrical. A soothing and more generic voice would not have done the job. If it gets too bad, you can still set the voice over to characters only. The game's music is rather subtle and stands out less than Disco's Sea Power soundtrack. For the most part, it's jazzy ambient tracks that blend in with the environmental noise. You can hear a few of them in this video. When we're dealing with narrative RPGs, everything we discussed before is of course secondary to the very substance of the game, its writing. So what really lies at the heart of such a stylish and technically well-made game? Well,
to live, to laugh, with a chance to laugh.
I can't describe Zero Parades' writing better than hit and miss. It made me cringe at times and chuckle at others. At its worst, the writing is loaded, overwrought, and quickly escalates into prose for the sake of prose.
Boneless flesh bound in impossible colors, twisted into seductively pleasing shapes. Brazen political threat. The pile declares that this too is the future of the working class. Defanged, fuzzy, sold in a heap.
The game sometimes feels like a vast number of disjointed writing exercises, some of which are skillfully executed, yet fail to constitute more than the sum of their parts. It's simply quite inconsistent, and for every cool moment there's a throwaway line with the power to single-handedly make you uninstall the game, from Live, Laugh, Love to Now Kiss, hot singles in your area, and Dreaming is Bourgeois. Other bits would have done numbers on 2013 Tumblr.
Nestor is dead, history too, poems are gay, and so are you. Cock is often used interchangeably to mean both male chicken and penis. You have never been more lesbian.
Then there's also some wonky world building going on. At times, Zero Parades tries to do what Disco did when it, for example, reconceptualized cars as electro-carriages to reinforce the autonomy of their fantasy world down to its very vocabulary. Zero Parades often attempts this too, until for some reason its world also has something like Islam.
On account of it being part of my religion, everything else is haram.
One more aspect that regularly pulled me out of my immersion was that, even though Herschel, codenamed Cascade, is an operand, meaning a spy for the Communist Secret Service, the game doesn't seem to respect the essential secrecy of the matter. Instead, Herschel is regularly addressed as operand in all kinds of public spaces, with no regards for the ears of curious bystanders.
Yo, opera, this way!
Opera, one of you to drop by.
Oh, hello, operand.
The doomed opera assassin.
Finally get up to speed, operand.
We're Spies. I'm Mter and she's Opera.
No wonder every enemy intelligence service was immediately aware of Herschel's arrival in Portofino. Speaking of Herschel, while she can at times be a reasonably fleshed-out protagonist, she inherited way too many of the well-recognizable tics, depressive musings and neurotic quirks of Disco's detective Harry Dubois. Much of her personality seems to be cobbled together from Harry's copotypes, particularly the Sorry Cop and Apocalypse Cop.
Cascade, emissary of failure, death, and the plague of human disunion.
Herschel is atoning for her mistakes, is on a quest for forgiveness, asks to be killed because that's what she deserves, announces herself as either the physical embodiment of shame or the courier of death, insists that everyone hates her, nobody wants to see her, that she's a failure who doesn't deserve anything, and that dark forces are gathering once again. The reason Herschel talks like this is because Harry used to say these things, and even when it sometimes makes sense for her to talk like Harry because she too has her biographic reasons to be gloomy and apologetic, it doesn't change the fact that all these previous examples could just be Harry's lines and nobody would have noticed. The two characters are just too similar, down even to their masochistic tendencies. And perhaps I only notice these things because my brain has been giga-fried by Disco Elysium, but there are pieces of Disco sprinkled all over the game. Mega fuckable is a line directly lifted from Jean, reality situation and high concept are Doom Spiral's catchphrases, the art police returns, talking to and punching inanimate objects is a Harryism if I ever saw one, and one of your skills is basically the deserter calling everything bourgeois and reactionary.
Nostalgia is a symptom of reactionary mental retreat. Reactionary pessimism.
And if you played Disco Elysium, you might remember a funny scene where Harry encounters an old rum stain. Instead of slobbering it up, you can decide to lick it, but only a little, as if that's less of a morbidly alcoholic behavior.
Licking the tasty rum stain off the counter, but only a little.
In Zero Parades, I found 5 variations of that joke in my single limited playthrough, and I'm sure there would be more waiting for me in future replays. There are few things more painful than hearing a person repeat someone else's old jokes in verse. And as a quick digression into deep nerd territory, I also want to mention that the only place I ever came across the expression dialectical glasses was in the Elysium novel Sacred and Terrible Air by Disco's lead writer Robert Kurwitz. Now, to be fair, the bulk of my critique is directed at how Herschel and her skills are written, because I actually enjoyed many of the other characters that I met in Portofino. The Mad Dr. Gonza made me laugh quite a few times when he vibe diagnosed my catatonic partner.
This is a clear-cut case of LAS, libidinal atrophy shutdown syndrome. Affects terminal virgin, unlaid husbands, and men exposed to overly uterine music. Tea drinkers too.
Petri, the music vendor, suffers under a clientele that is only interested in the worst slop of the Lalusian culture industry.
As you can see, I spend my days backed into a corner, hopelessly outnumbered by the dead-eyed horde, dreaming of format-assisted auto-annihilation.
Kaleidoscope is just a really cool guy, while also being a bit of a weirdo.
Many a preteen has been spiritually obliterated by the force of emotion ultraviolet conjures. Discount her at your peril.
And every fiber in my being urged me to protect Carolina.
Please, I can't do this alone.
In short, there's a diverse cast of charming characters to get invested in, most of whom have their own very distinctive voices. But if we return our attention to the writing in general and the most focal character, Herschel, then Zero Parades can't quite shake off the accusation of being derivative. Sometimes the game fails because it wants to be Disco Elysium but doesn't quite get there, and sometimes it fails exactly because it nails the tone of Disco Elysium. And while it's of course perfectly fine for a game to reuse assets from its predecessors, like graphic assets, soundbites or mechanics, it feels deeply unnatural once you notice this happening with character traits, tropes and even exact speech patterns and vocabulary. In the end, I just don't think that Zero Parades managed to create its own distinctive literary style. I can't say whether that's because of a lack of skill or because of a misguided abundance of caution. I like to believe that it's the latter. All I know for sure is that Zero Parades is at its best when it doesn't even try to be Disco Elysium, and I want to take a minute to talk about those exact moments. Because despite their similarities in genre and, to a degree, writing, Zero Parades and Disco Elysium follow a very different structure. While Disco Elysium is marketed as an RPG in which your choices matter, that is only true to a limited extent. Sure, there are different ways to fulfill certain tasks and there's a lot of micro-reactivity going on, but on a grand scale, everything always progresses in more or less the same way. And if you played the game even halfway diligently and didn't actively sabotage your playthrough, your precinct will always welcome you back. Zero Parades is, in this regard, a more dynamic game. I will be as abstract here as possible to avoid spoilers, but the middle part of the game splits into 6 different missions to recruit team members for your final assignment. Since you can only take 3 out of the 6 possible crew members with you, a good part of the game will be left unexplored. Your 3 chosen companions will then also have an impact on how your endgame plays out. The final outcome will be determined by the team members you recruited, a few key items that you might have collected, and certain choices that you made early in the game whose impact I severely underestimated. In short, the endgame unfolds in ways that let you fail dramatically. My first playthrough ended in a truly brutal way for both Herschel and everyone I cared about. What stuck with me was the creeping realization that I didn't outsmart my enemies at all, but was, in fact, still getting played, and that I never left the web of intrigues for even a second. This is where Zero Parades is at its best, and as the plot thickens towards the end of the game, the writing gets better too, because that's when it stops producing prose for the sake of prose and instead tightens up to bring the story home. I think this is where we finally hear Zero Parade's very own voice when we are presented with the actual storytelling of a spy thriller RPG. And it's no coincidence that the game shines where it's the most different from Disco Elysium, because when you think about it, Disco never had much of a plot to speak of. And before you pick up the pitchforks, I really just mean that its essential story progression and the actual event that happened during the game can be summarized in like 2 sentences. This has of course never hurt it, and it's still my favorite game of all time. But when I replay Disco Elysium, it's to focus on different skills or to embrace another political ideology, not to get a different ending. Zero Parades, on the other hand, made me interested in how the story would work out differently if I pursued alternative quests, recruited different characters, or prepared an L-pop spirit nuke for the final showdown. It's why I plan to run it back right after finishing this video. In conclusion, while Zero Parades has its fair share of shortcomings, I think it shines and even outclasses its predecessor when it focuses on suspenseful and climactic, choice-driven storytelling. As a political RPG, Disco Elysium always stood out to me as one of the few games written by people who actually knew a bit of politics beyond surface aesthetics and whose notion of politics extended past different flavors of liberalism. This unusually vast political horizon was then represented by a roster of characters who expressed genuine political convictions. There was earnesty in their beliefs, be it in fascism, communism, bureaucratic centralism, or the free market. Zero Parades might not be less politically educated, but smothers every spark of sincerity under layers of irony and apathy. There is no reference to politics that isn't reduced to a meme with little overarching meaning to it.
Just owning seems wrong. Bourgeois, even.
Our protagonist Herschel is literally a spy from the communist superbloc, but even at her most communist, she talks about communism like a 20-year-old college student with a semi-ironic Stalin poster. A charitable in-universe interpretation of this detachedness would highlight the world of Zero Parades as a post-ideological one, where actual belief systems are but a backdrop to the Machiavellian power struggles between its world powers.
Just because I'm working for the opera does not make me some kind of communist.
It really doesn't matter whether you represent the communists, fascists or bankers when your role is solely to outplay your enemy. A less sympathetic interpretation might claim that the studio can't afford to portray genuine beliefs anymore after losing the moral high ground and is now hiding behind a shield of ironic cynicism. But regardless of its reasons, it's sad to see Disco's political maturity reduced to quips and empty signifiers. It makes Zero Parade's regress to the purely aesthetical references to politics that its predecessor first broke out from. If there is one thing that I wish the game industry would learn from Disco Elysium, it's that video game writing doesn't take care of itself, but requires actual writers, people capable of producing a novel, poem, or philosophical essay of decent literary quality. This is particularly true for narrative games that, when done with your average video game writing, just combine the worst of two media. Nobody wants to read a bad game when they could play a fun game and read a good book. That was my experience with many text-heavy narrative games, and I feared that Zero Parades might join that lineup. But after the 30 hours of my first playthrough, I must say that its very pronounced hills and peaks average out to a level of literary quality that might not rival Disco Elysium, but still 99% of other games. Now, there will be a good amount of people who won't forgive me for not reducing the game to an expression of the studio's drama and legal situation. But I think it deserves to be examined fairly, because no matter if you want it or not, Zero Parades will be the benchmark of any future disco-like, second only to Disco Elysium itself. And I think we owe it to the progression of the genre, one that I really want to succeed, to point out what worked and what didn't. So to conclude our video, Zero Parades is neither a new Disco Elysium nor a disaster. It's a game that oozes style and that managed to fine-tune Disco's core mechanics. Its writing is a roller coaster of derivative quips at its worst and a fascinating spy thriller at its best. Zero Parades might not go down in the annals of video game history or spawn a fan community that is as vast and dedicated as that of its predecessor, but I think it has earned the title of a well-crafted RPG.
Melivorskva Osmowar Divish Kunadka from pub to Vigar Johedaka Jivata, each pig duverskaz Vilurbitsu, Xning Ornbeck Salas van Wars Converge.